We will kickstart this episode of NSSG Talks of September, where I would like just to make a small note on the fact that it was exactly 1 year ago that we launched this webinar series in the peak of the crisis that is still neighboring our country, Romania. We are, of course, live from Bucharest. And what I want to emphasize about this episode is the fact that we have a very special guest with us. I would like to share my appreciation. It's an absolute honor to have with us our guest speaker of today, Mr. Iulian Chifu, former State Secretary of Security and International Affairs for the Prime Minister of Romania. What's very important is that Mr. Chifu was in charge to navigate Romania through this very demanding role at the border of both NATO and EU during the peak of the crisis. But enough with my clumsy English, and I will pass the microphone to my very knowledgeable colleague Joe Frederick, who will make the proper introductions for our presentation of today and our discussion. Joe, please.
You're always too kind, Lily. Thank you. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of NSSG Talks. As Lily mentioned, we've got a very special guest with us today, Professor Dr. Iulian Chifu, who will kind of provide us some assessments and his insight and his knowledge and a bit of kind of foresight into Romania and its increasingly critical role in the kind of Black Sea region. Lily, do you want to move the slide?
Sure. I'm sorry, but I don't know why I'm not able to move the slide. No, sorry, I have a technical glitch. Sorry.
Okay.
All right, super.
Okay. But before we get into this topic for today, a little bit about NSSG. We are a specialist risk management organization based in Bucharest, Romania. We have offices in Cairo, Egypt, New York City, and more recently in Kiev, Ukraine. We've got representative offices in the UK, Israel, and Saudi Arabia as well. We provide a raft of services, providing services to multinational companies with respect to enterprise risk management. Please check us out at www.nssg.global. Next slide, Lily. Right, as Lily mentioned, we've got a very special guest with us today, Professor Dr. Iulian Chifu, who's the president of the Center for Conflict Prevention and Early Warning, and he was the former Secretary of State on Foreign Relations, Security, and Strategic Affairs for the Prime Minister of Romania between 2021 and 2023. We also have with us Robert Belante, our own in-house expert, senior Eurasia analyst, who shares a lot of common threads in terms of knowledge and insight in this particular region. And the title of this presentation is Bordering Conflict, Romania's Demanding Role at the Border with NATO and EU, and framed in the context of what's happening in Ukraine, and as well as the kind of Black Sea region. Next slide, Lily. Before we kick off on this special topic, I have to mention a brief bio of Dr. Chifu. As mentioned, he was the former Secretary of Foreign Relations at the Prime Minister's office. He was also the founding president of the Center for Conflict Prevention and Early Warning in Bucharest. He's an associate professor specializing in conflict analysis, decision-making in crisis, and the post-Soviet space with the Department of International Relations, National School of Political and Administrative Studies in Bucharest. He's also a professor at the National Defense University. He served as the counselor of the Vice President of the Romanian Senate. He was also an associate professor at the National Intelligence Academy of Bucharest. And from 2000 to 2007, he was a scientific secretary at the Department of International Relations, National School of Political and Administrative Studies, Bucharest. And between 2001 and 2002, He was the Director of Conflict Prevention within the Bucharest Black Sea Academic Foundation. He's written several books and dozens of articles on security, foreign policy, conflict analysis, and decision-making in crisis and international relations. As you can see, we have a very experienced academic, diplomat in NSSG headquarters, who's going to provide us a lot of valuable insight and analysis and a bit of kind of forecasting on this particular region that's become so vital today and in the future. And Robert Belante, our analyst, will kind of ask questions throughout to Dr. Chifu to kind of drive the discussion. Dr. Chifu, thank you very much for being with us today. We'd like to have a kind of very informal kind of discussion about this topic. We have provided a kind of a topics list or a table of contents of discussion, but we at NSSG, want to have a more kind of friendly atmosphere, and therefore we're going to have kind of an informal discussion, and we hope you'll feel that it's kind of informal as well. Next slide, Lily. Lily, can you change the slide? Right. Dr. Chifu, so we've got several topics to discuss with you today. It's very kind of comprehensive, and I'm sure you can talk about this for hours and hours, and we'd be happy to kind of sit and have this discussion with you for hours and hours as well. But we'll try to get through these as swiftly as possible. Right, so our first topic is Romania's strategic position, risks and opportunities in the Ukrainian reconstruction effort. Then we'll move on to Romania's border defense and security strategy. And there's a lot of recent developments lately with the downing of a drone within kind of Romanian territory that perhaps you can kind of shed some light on. There's also a kind of refugee situation. We want to look at the kind of socio-economic and political implications of that. And obviously the Ukraine war's impact on the Black Sea region. This has become very critical over the past year or so in terms of international trade and food insecurity. And food insecurity leads to kind of instability in certain parts of the world as well. And then lastly, we want to know what you think about the future, with respect to Romania's position and its relations with the EU, the US, the West, and NATO in particular. And then we'll end with a Q&A session. So without kind of further delay, Dr. Chifu, our first topic is Romania's strategic position, risks and opportunities in the Ukrainian reconstruction efforts. If you could give us your thoughts and opinions on that, please.
Sure. I will begin a little bit with the war, because actually we are facing since the 24th of February last year the coming back of the war as an instrument of foreign policy and for solving some levels of ambition, and why not some internal problems for a certain actor, meaning Putin's Russia. And this comes with a number of dramatic changes at the level of the security environment, for sure. The most important risk comes from the definition of victory that Russia holds. As you know, if we have to consider the five scenarios that would be applicable to the full-scale war of aggression of Russia in Ukraine, the victory for Russia's side would be to create a landlocked Ukraine, change the government in Kiev, and have a kind of Lukashenko, but not with the experience of the Belarusian dictator. It means that actually Russia aims, and I know for a fact that it is still on the table, by the way, it is public, that the aims and the definition of victory of Russia didn't change from the beginning of the war, which means that they would like to take all the annexed territory, meaning Kherson, Zaporozhye, Donetsk and Luhansk, the full regions of Ukraine, together with the Odessa region, even with Vinnytsia as well, to annex it to the Russian Federation and to leave a smaller Ukraine, landlocked, without any possibility of exports and of relevance, and with a puppet government in Kiev. Now, the strategic win for Russia would be at least to stop in annexing the regions that it has formally moved to Russia, meaning the 4 regions that I've underlined, Crimea included. We can have a third scenario, which is a standstill. Incapacity of the Ukrainians to break through, incapacity of the Russians to move ahead, so more or less with a line of contacts that will stand in the same position, a kind of freezing the conflict, which means welcoming the stop and go, so the reprise of the conflict once this is melting. So every time when Russia accumulates enough capacity, enough resources, it can come back and do its thing. So actually, the threat of the war is there. The fourth scenario would be a strategic win for Ukraine. And with that, I'm moving little by little definition of victory for Ukraine, for Kiev. So strategic victory for Ukraine would mean a breakthrough, would mean splitting the fronts, having 2 fronts, one in the east, one in the south, is what they are doing by challenging the channel and the corridor which links Russia by land via the northwestern part of the Azov Sea to Crimea. It's what is happening now. If it happens, if Ukraine succeeds in making this breakthrough, if it can recuperate its territory up to the Crimea, make the pressure on Crimea, the destruction of the Kerch Bridge is something that will happen normally. At the point where you have a real pressure on Crimea, Russia can come in real phase with the real background at the table and negotiate. So that's why we are calling this a strategic win for Ukraine. And the victory for Ukraine, for sure, is recuperating all the territories in the international recognized borders, but also preventing Russia for retaking the war once again as a possibility. So once we have this spectrum, we can realize which way and how and when we can move to any type of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. As long as definitions of victory are completely opposite, completely without any common part, we cannot move to any type of negotiation. Now, related to Romania, for sure, if a strategic victory and the victory of Russia is happening, we will have the Russians directly as neighbors. We already have them here in Crimea, on the other side of this Bay of Odessa. And we will have them at the gorges of the Danube and more or less surely on the Prut River, because actually the Republic of Moldova doesn't have any capacity to react, so it would be the next bite of Russia. It will also mean a huge pressure to all the neighbors in the post-Soviet space, the neighbors of the Russians' neighbors. So if you ask today, Republic of Moldova will tell you that they are next. Georgia will tell you they are next. Azerbaijan is not very sure that they are not next. Kazakhstan is also in the same area. The Baltic states will feel the same. And here on the shores of the Black Sea, it's also a sense of a possibility for Russia to extend any type of war in any case. And that's the big change of the war. We can no longer rule out a full-scale, high-intensity, long-term war of Russia against a NATO country in the eastern flank, meaning that this perspective changed dramatically the way that we are drafting the reaction. As you know, we have already in place a number of added value, a number of assessment, and also some things developed, beginning with the strategic concept last year in Madrid, NATO strategic concept. This year, final declaration in Vilnius. Actually, it's an enforcement of the whole presence of forces all along the eastern flank of NATO. It is also about putting in place command and control center, pre-positioning capabilities, and a possibility to augment, to raise the level of the battle groups from battalion to brigade. These are in place. The big problem is, and that's another change happening in Vilnius, that we moved from defense and deterrence to forward defense. Okay, for somebody who is not in the field of strategic study, maybe it won't mean something different. But the idea that has been underlined by President Biden, that is in the final declaration of the summit in Vilnius, that not an inch of the territory of the states of the alliance will not be give up at any point to any aggressor, means two things. First, that we've learned the lesson the hard way. We've learned the lesson of Ukraine, how difficult it is to regain your territory once it is annexed, it is occupied by a force and by a force of the dimension of Russia. The second point is that you need to change the philosophy of your defense. If you know, in the Warsaw Summit, NATO Warsaw Summit, we had a study by the Atlantic Council, you can find it, it's a public document, which says the Baltic state cannot be defended. The Baltic state can only be regained because of a number of strategic issues, not least by the fact that they are split or the linkage with the NATO territories, the Suwałki Gorge there. And so it's a passage very narrow, and the capabilities of the Baltic states altogether combined can not face at any point a position of, I don't know, an army, several divisions of Russian army. Now, this puts us in a situation of changing dramatically the way that we are planning. Somebody can say, well, Russia has lost actually the war up to now, at least the image and the war, the perception about the war to Ukraine. It doesn't have a second army to begin its war against the West, against NATO. It is true, completely true. But if Russia needs another 5 years, maybe 3 to 5 years, to rebuild its capabilities and to have an army to do that, we in the West, we also need 5, 7 years maybe to change, to plan and to apply our plans to defend against such a threat that was never considered. And let me give you just a few lines. First, manpower. The biggest part of the states, including Romania, has gave up the conscription, which means that actually we just have something like 50,000 people as reserves, and that reserve is shrinking year by year because of the age of the former conscripts that are now in the reserve, and they are going to exit that period. Second, we all moved due to a very ideatic idea and appealing idea of Francis Fukuyama, yes, the end of the history. We all moved to professional armies. Professional armies, small armies with capability to do war at a strategic distance, to do crisis management, to do actually the three missions that are included in NATO, and which have a problem defending the territory. That's one and the first of the mission, defending a territory in front of a long-term, high-intensity war. What is the difference? The most important part of this difference comes from the fact that actually you need to have manpower, so you need to shift something to maybe volunteer first, or to any type of conscription to open the door and to raise the level of the army. For instance, Poland has moved in that direction. They are aiming to have 300,000, 350,000 soldiers in their army. We need to do the same, and we have the plans related to this, but it doesn't happen overnight. That's why I was telling you the 5-7 years that we have till Russia will have rebuilt its army, we have to use it. The second point, we need to shift the defense industry to a war industry. It means large quantities, huge numbers of capabilities, huge quantities of ammunition. We discover once again the hard way that we are not able to deliver the needed ammunition to Ukraine in order to maintain the line and to defend itself. So we need to change the production and begin a new production of that kind. It means raising the level of investment. It means, and we are democracies, we need to convince our people to support such a change. It's not easy. And for sure, we have to make some changes related to the doctrines. So manpower, capabilities, ammunition, and doctrine. In the doctrine side, we have a huge problem, and I will share this with you. It's not a secret, but it is to be reflected on. It is about the deterrence. We know what deterrence means. If we consider that if you have preposition troops, if you have preposition capabilities, if you have exercises and trainings of the armies on the territory and all of the allies, you have all the premises to create the deterrence, as in defense and deterrence that we have after 2014, after the annexation of Crimea and the Russian aggression in the eastern regions of Ukraine. But it's a but. We learn in this war, we have a number of lessons learned, but one of the most important was the introduction by Russia of the so-called dispensable infantry. You know, in Russia, human rights are not really in the first place. They are not really respecting this, and it's an euphemism, not really respecting. They disregard the human life. If you look at the way that they are praising the fact that they lost 12 million in the Second World War, and they are really proud of it, you can realize that life doesn't count. We in democracies, we have to take very care when you're sending soldiers who have all the prerequisite that the soldier is alive, that he is not taking extra risk, and in any case, he shouldn't be sent to certain death or to high risks. Well, in Russia's case, they recruited inmates, they recruited in prisons, they recruited in small ethnical groups, remotely somewhere in depth of Siberia, in all those regions, and created this dispensable infantry that they use in two ways. The first one, they send them with a very low level and of technological and capabilities in the first line, in order to uncover where the capabilities of the enemies are, of the Ukrainians are. Where is the artillery, where they are shooting, what is the attack? And after that, the Russian army, I mean the regular one, coming over and taking off. The second way that they use the dispensable infantry were something that is used in the First World War, for sure in the second one, it's the wave attacks. You have numbers of waves who are still coming, still coming, still coming. I discussed with some of the Ukrainians that were in the first line. They say, look, they are coming and we are shooting them. And it's quite a suicide. The level of victims for the first 4, 5, 6 waves, it's 85, 90+%. They are dying, but they are still coming. Number to count. They are still coming on our trenches. At some point, we don't have enough ammunition to kill them all. We don't have enough time in between waves to prepare for, and so on and so forth. That changes dramatically the idea of deterrence. It changes a lot of things, and I'm just going to underline this one, which is linked to not an inch of the territory, so on and so forth. Why? Because if we have an idea of deterrence, what deterrence would mean today? It would mean to kill all those troops. How many should we kill in order to deter Russia? 10,000, 20,000? 100,000, 200,000, the whole army. What deterrence means in the condition when you face a country that puts in front of you the dispensable infantry. And mutatis mutandis, I will run with that, and maybe we'll come back to actually to the opportunities and to the reconstruction efforts of Ukraine. But first, let's do the war. Well, go figure out how deterrence will look like, where in front of you it's not a nation with 142 million, maybe 120 still in Russia, but a nation with 1.4 billion people. It's a dramatic change of the war when you're facing an autocratic country with complete disregard of the human lives, which has numbers. And it's another thing that we've learned, number do count, quantity count. We are all looking at the qualities of the type of capabilities that Russia is putting, straight first from the storages, the T-50 since 1950, or T-62 or T-72 tanks. Well, it is in terms, sorry for my French, it's shit, but it's a lot of shit, and they are coming over, and they are coming over, and they are coming over. The capacity to build, sure, it's very important, but the capacity to build new capabilities, modern ones, like at least T-90 for Russia, is quite low. They are completely dependent on a number of products coming from the West. It is true on another point that we've discovered, not only in the Russian technology, military technology, but also in the Iranian one, and that's public figure. 60–70% of the components are coming from the West, which means that a number of producers are avoiding the sanctions, are conturning the rules, and are supplying in a special way Russian military and Russia as an actor. I think that now we have on the table how the world looks like, why and what we should change here in the eastern flank, but actually in the whole West. Now we can discuss reconstruction, but first let's see how the war is going to end. I hope that I've covered at least the image of the war, so we can move to the security in the Black Sea, in the wider Black Sea region, then reconstruction and everything that is linked to that, and for sure Romania's position. I'm very eager to arrive to that, please.
Yeah, I think you've set the stage very thoroughly and comprehensively. Thank you for that, and you've actually unpacked a lot in what you just said. And I think the main thing I got out of it were two things really. One is you seem to have a kind of a pessimistic forecast of the prosecution of this war, and I think
I'm an optimist.
You're an optimist.
I'm realist, but I'm optimist. And this is my assessment of the war with all the scenarios. And I can tell you, for any strategic planner everywhere in the world, for you as a firm dealing with risk, you cannot afford strategic surprise. And one of the conditions for avoiding it is to make prospective studies and to plan for each and every scenario, including those who have a very low level of probability. I didn't assign to the 5 scenarios that I presented any probability. But yeah, you have to consider all of that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, 100% correct. I think the other message I got out of this was that in order to kind of prosecute a war, and you kind of focused heavily on this in terms of the resources, you talked extensively about the manpower and the kind of dispensable infantries, and how this doctrine is actually, you know, decades old and maybe arguably longer than that, going beyond kind of World War II. If you look at kind of, you know, the broader context of geopolitics and kind of, you know, Russia's friendships with or pragmatic kind of relations with Iran and China, and now North Korea, you know, you can almost safely assume that this war is going to continue for the foreseeable future, and that's from a kind of resource perspective, right? So technological resources, financial resources, and whether or not China feels like deploying its own troops to Ukraine, which would be a politically bad.
I didn't allude yet to the game changers because actually it wasn't a presentation of the war, but that is, and we don't need China to move in that direction. Go figure out that we already discovered Cubanese soldiers in Ukraine, and that this meeting in Vostok and between the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and President Putin is actually underlying the fact that we can have rather sooner than later also North Korean troops on the ground. So no need of Chinese.
Okay, good. Robert, do you have any questions? And then, I think you're on mute. Still can't hear you.
Yes, please.
Okay.
I can hear you, please. Well?
No, we can't hear Robert. Sorry. Robert, we can't hear you. Maybe it's the new headphones you have.
Okay, while we...
So if it's okay, I will move a little bit for covering this time frame on the strategic position and the reconstruction of efforts of Ukraine. For sure, we already have the plan, and we have a responsible, which is the European Union. We have a gathering. We have passed by a number of structures or concepts for reconstruction, beginning with a number of needs of Ukraine, who put it in front. Then we move to a kind of funds to be gathering and to be allocated in different directions. Now we have a very clear idea how things are going to move in order to be coordinated, and it's the European Commission, is the EU, who is responsible for that. Two very important things. The first one, reconstruction of Ukraine can't go on as long as we don't know where we are going to reconstruct. This is not applicable for the northwestern part of the country of Ukraine, which everybody assumes will stay with Ukraine, meaning everything which is on the right bank of the Dnipro River, so Kiev on the right bank, and everything that is northwestern, Lviv, all those parts, we can begin and build. Even during war times with, well, it's a huge discussion about who is assuming the insurance for everything that you're building, because actually it's a war zone everywhere since Russia is attacking everything. The second very important part is that reconstruction in the physical sense will not happen, and we've seen already publicly those signs by the letter sent by President Biden to President Zelensky, unless we are seeing also in Ukraine a democratic country with very clear reform that it needs to do. And I'm talking about the US letter because it's different, or it's added to the conditions that Ukraine has to fulfill in order that at the end of this year we could have an opening of negotiations for entering the EU. As you know, together with the Republic of Moldova, they've been granted the candidate status, but opening the negotiation needs to cover a number of points for each of the country to be fulfilled, a number of reforms to be fulfilled, in order that what we call the Copenhagen criteria will be fulfilled. So it won't happens, we won't have a reconstruction of Ukraine in physical terms without reconstruction in reforms and in, as a democratic, stable, sustainable democracy. And by the way, what the new letter tells us is that even the deliveries of a certain types of weaponry capabilities to Ukraine will need also to be accompanied by a number of reforms, especially in the rule of law, anti-corruption, democracy, freedom of media, fighting the oligarchs, so on, and also some market criteria as well, related especially to the energy fields. So actually, this is the change, and reconstruction will come with that. Romania's position, as Poland's, as other countries neighboring Ukraine, are very important, because actually you can't come with anything into Ukraine if you're not passing via one of those countries. The perspective of coming with ships with materials to reconstruct in Odessa, Berdyansk, Ilyushovsk, I don't know, Mykolaiv, in the ports that Ukraine still controls, is very low at this point, and in the foreseeable future. Moreover, that now Russia has chosen, because it doesn't have the capacity of enforcing a blockade from Odessa to Istanbul and further on, to destroy the harbor, the ports capabilities, and this will create a problem to move on if you don't have those capabilities to assume and to absorb it. So actually, every transport will happen via those countries. Moreover, it is easier to build up capabilities, storages of, I don't know, concrete production of everything that is that you need for constructions, for reconstruction in the field, in the physical realm, energy reconstruction, so on and so forth. If you don't use some hubs that would be situated exactly in those countries where you can already build, you have the capabilities, and from there on you can transport in all those materials inside Ukraine. So that's another point. On a short notice, even the capabilities of Ukraine for producing its own long-range missiles, for instance, are located outside of Ukrainian's territory. So I don't think that in the foreseeable future we will see very soon something of this kind inside Ukraine or coming via the ports. So it's an open door. This is the added value. Everybody who has the capacity and who wants to invest in the future of reconstruction should begin to use what they need, or the existing hubs. We have the hub in Suceava, which is humanitarian right now. It will shift more probably to a hub for reconstruction materials, so on and so forth. So that's a part of the opportunities that the neighborhood is offering, especially considering that Romania and Ukraine share the longest border. So Ukraine has the longest border with a Western country, with Romania. And in between ourselves, we have Republic of Moldova, which is also part of the same game. Actually needs its own type of reconstruction, which is not a post-war reconstruction, but more of a reformed pro-European reconstruction as well. If your colleagues succeed in getting in.
Robert, all good now?
Yes. Hello.
I just use this time frame just for continuing answerings, please.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much for your remarks up to this point. Very, very interesting, because I focus on the topics that you've talked about on a daily basis. I would have a lot of questions about Ukraine, obviously, but I would like to move the focus on Romania itself. So not necessarily Romania's role in Ukraine or for Ukraine, but as a consequence of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, how has Romania's role changed within the EU and NATO? So we are, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so Romania, EU and NATO. We have drafted the substance of and the concept of our presence in the EU and NATO for a long time, actually since the accession. So this is the definition, and you will find it in all the documents that Romania holds. We have three pillars: strategic partnership with the US, more important role inside NATO. When I'm talking more important role, it's a role that is over the one that is assigned by our population, our GDP per capita, our military investments, and it is the case. And also we are a pro-European country, a European core country, comparing to the skeptics or to the European who are putting their national interests first. So it's in our national interest, and it's the way that we design it, that NATO, EU are cohesive, and that that type of integration goes on because this is helping ourselves. Now, the war in Ukraine didn't change dramatically things. There are also some other traits that we have being here, but since, and you know very well, if you are in Romania, you know very well, it's a neighborhood where if you want to assume any type of role, there will be a number of other neighbors that will challenge this. So we never assumed any responsibility of, I don't know, regional power or regional responsibilities or things like this, even though we played that role. And we chose to do that by deeds, and we've done it with Ukraine, we've done it with Republic of Moldova, which we supported during the war, like 90% of the whole processes, generally, from reforms to energy supplies to refugees that we've took directly from their mutual border with Ukraine and transported directly in Romania because we have a different capacity of absorption, so on and so forth. So actually, in that area, maybe a number of the countries in the region realized the role of Romania, and that's it. Because Romania never claimed any special type of role of everything. It came naturally. Related to refugees, because I already pronounced that, yes, we receive a huge number of refugees, a huge number of resortisans from other countries that wanted to leave Ukraine in the first moments of the war, passed by Romania, and we extracted a huge number. I will just say to the level of the Indians who were studying in Ukraine. There were something like 20,000 that exited via Romania, and they were airlifted directly to India in direct relationship with them. But actually, we extracted resortisans of practically all the countries in the world via Romania, and that's an added value as well. So we used our geographical position, we used our capacities to assist Ukraine. Most important for sure, the solidarity lanes and the exports of grains and of all the products which are happening via Romania. And that's another huge, huge challenge, because actually overnight we were in a position of having ×7 the level of pressure at our borders. So we had a certain level of trade and of transit. As a sudden, overnight, we had a ×7. For sure, our infrastructure, beginning with customs, with the railroads, with everything else, was not prepared to absorb that quantity. And for sure, in the beginning, we had huge problems with the length of the waiting lines in order to enter our territory, until we succeed in doing, together with the European Commission, by the way, because a number of rules for entering the countries are related to customs are those of the European Commission, not the European Union. So we were not able, even individually, to safeguard that situation only by ourselves. But it was a good mobilization, and we succeeded in doing that. For sure, we would have preferred to use the trains and the barges in order to come with high quantities of grain that needed to be exported via ship. Because actually, if you come with tracks, you need something like, I don't know, around 1,000 tracks to fill up a big ship in Constanța. And the time that you need to fill a big ship takes you enough, and you're blocking actually the exit. So it doesn't work that way. Instead of having 5 to 6 trains or 6 to 7 barges that you can put automatically in such a ship. Moreover, we have a number of ports in the Danube, including Galați, which is a deep water port, which means that you can come with maritime ships directly to Galați. We extended the train line with the gauges at the Soviet type, you know, of gauges wider, and up to the point where you can put it directly into the ships. Unfortunately, we have foreseen that for all our ports, and I mean Galați, Brăila, Tulcea, they are underused beginning with the war, beginning with February last year. But instead we have a huge pressure on Constanța, a huge pressure on Sulina Channel, where once again, we don't have the big barges that were recommended to travel there, because it's a number of persons that go with it. It's far more complicated if you come with little boats and you're filling with hundreds of boats. So it's still an ongoing discussion and negotiation for an effectiveness of the capacity of exports, and that's also an added value of Romania, which comes every time. And actually, we tried to assist Ukraine every time with everything that we were able to put on the table. Even the biggest part of the help is coming directly from the Romanian government and not from the EU. We always heard that the EU is going to pay and so on. It doesn't work that way. EU is paying only very specific things and only with the funds that are allocated to you, to the country, to Romania. So actually it's also our funds, including in each and every such investment, and any investment takes time.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to touch upon really briefly on 3 points that you mentioned in your response, and if you could explore them, it would be great to hear your take on it. Well, if I understand correctly, you said that Romania's role in Western institutions did not change that much as a consequence of the war. And the question is why? Considering how much it has done, why has there been no more international recognition? And the elephant in the room here, of course, is a bit the Schengen agreement, or possibly the US visa waiver. Really briefly on 2 more points, and you choose the one you want to.
Okay, let me take this one. It's easier to do that. So it didn't change in the sense of Romanians' approach to this institution. It's true on another point, and it's up to the European Union to really show that it has geopolitical approach. And if you take the State of the Union statement of Ursula von der Leyen last week, you can find there how European Union, aka Commission, has discussed. But don't forget that any discussion related to European Union happens in the European Council, where we need consensus for all the countries, and that cannot be changed because that's the treaty. Related to the visa waiver, once again, it doesn't happen overnight. We have a new ambassador, US ambassador, who is really keen to solve it, and it has announced that 2025 will be a good year, because actually we need a steady progress that will happen for a number of years, successive years. So actually, the calculus shows us that 2025 would be the easiest and it's the shortest time frame for lifting visa waiver. If it's not a decision of another kind, and it's not probable to happen, because next year it's an election year. After that, it's going to be difficult to change the rules for granting visa waiver into the US Congress. We are democracies, and that's how things are happening, and the EU is a democratic organization, has the same rules, so we have to observe that. I'm not talking here about the frustration that we have when some of the EU members, some of NATO members have different takes, ignoring the fact that we are at war, and that they are trying to be a kind of mediators, or to have some old types, or to have an exceptionalist approach to the war, which is different than the one that we all are considering and approving. And by the way, I have to underline that all the decisions EU and NATO have been taken with a full unanimity. So Hungary, Poland, Italy, Greece, you name it, have been a part of the game, as in NATO, Turkey has been a part of the game. So actually, it's not complaining from the consolidation of that position, but it's about nuances, interests, and maybe it's also a matter of behavior. We chose to be the most pro-European, pro-NATO, and try to solve our own problems without an extra pressure or a different type of behavior that will accentuate risks inside those institutions.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm just gonna make another quick question and then pass it to Joe for further clarifications. I would like to ask your take, on one hand, on the refugee situation at the moment within Romania. Is there any change akin to what is happening in Poland, let's say, with slightly growing anti-Ukrainian sentiment and the willingness for them to possibly return home as soon as the war finishes? And the second point, which is related.
No. Let's stay to this, because it's important and it has two aspects, and they are different. One is relationship with the refugees. The refugees are welcome in Romania. We need a labor well-prepared force. It's true that 80% of the refugees that are coming are women and children, but they are welcome in Romania. We need them. We have more than 6,600 already formally registered working in Romania. The other one have different types of allowances. We have more than 100,000 refugees, and it's an open door. We don't have a problem here. The problem is the type of Ukrainian fatigue or any type of other reaction. We are getting closer to an election next year. Actually, we have 4 rounds of the election first. And we do have an extreme right party here also. On another point, there are a number of things that are old disputes, as it happens with all the neighbors. The government and put them aside for their time frame because we have a war, and there is far more important for Ukraine to win the war. But actually, minorities speaking Romanian language, a recognition of the fact that there's no such a thing as Moldavian language, different of Romanians, and things like this are on the table, and we don't have step further coming from Ukraine. Once again, understandable. But this is very much used by the propaganda, by the information warfare, by Russia, and by the extreme right parties and nationalistic parties here in Romania. And that is the only source of reactions, but not towards the migrants, not towards refugees, but towards actually Ukrainian government, because of this lack of advances and step further related to old issues that stand in between ourselves. For instance, the idea of trying to shift to Bystroje, for instance, the traffic, when we have an agreement in Belgrade, when Bystroje is not useful, Bystroje has to be reinforced and in depth. Like every year, it's the last one of the gorge, in the gorges of the Danube, and it is the one that accumulates the most alluvions. So actually, that was why Sulina is the transport part in the Danube. So these are differences, they are not coming from here, they are coming from history, they are coming from the disputes between Socialist Romania and Soviet Union. We inherited, but there's no solution and not a step forward during these times. Once again, understandable, it is a war, but these are the only ones that can accentuate or relativize the support for Ukraine. But once again, this is meaningful, it's marginal, it's still not going to change the government's approach, of any government approach towards Ukraine.
Dr. Chifu, thank you for that. Maybe I'd like to wrap maybe the last two topics into one, basically. So talking about the Black Sea region in terms of security, geopolitics, and trade, and what are your thoughts on the kind of outcome? It seems like from a Western perspective, NATO perspective on security in the Black Sea region, it seems like there's no kind of coherent policy, on what the course of action is, basically. And so maybe we can kind of get your thoughts on that, kind of wrap those 2 points together, and then we'll go into Q&A.
True. So first, we have a number of issues related to why the Black Sea region. The first one being the fact that Russia assumes parts of the Black Sea aerial force alleged exercises, shooting exercises, which means that basically they are blocking big parts of the Black Sea. We have a problem with the freedom of navigation. We have a problem because of the Montreux Convention applied very strictly by Turkey, our alliance strategic partner, which allowed on one hand Russia not to have the capacity to replace its ships who have been sank by Ukraine. On another point, it prevents NATO from doing any type of maritime exercises here in the wider Black Sea region. We have on the table a strategy. The strategy of the Black Sea, we have a decision in the Congress, US Congress, but now it is a strategy that is required to be made at the State Department by all the institutions there, and it is the one that is going to make the difference. From the NATO point of view, the problem still remains Turkey, which is the guardian of the strait, and who refuse to have any involvement of any other NATO ally inside the area of the Black Sea, at least till the war is ending. That's a fact of life, and it comes with a number of issues, from freedom of navigation, and I'm not talking only about north-south, from Odessa, from Ukraine to Istanbul to Turkey and further on, but also east-west, because it's also, for instance, from Kulevi, from Anaklia, the future port of Georgia, deepwater port of Georgia, to Constance. And that's another very important port that needs to be rebuilt. So actually in that area, we need to see things evolving. And in that area, it's also a matter of convincing Turkey, and some points are on the table. Because actually the fact that Russia didn't relaunch this grain initiative that Turkey and the UN has advocated for is creating deep problems between Ankara and Moscow, and maybe it will shift little by little and flexibilize more Turkey's position in considering the needs for security in that region. Even the fact that it has been alluded, we have some drones that can land or being shot and arrive on the territory of Romania. Okay, it's not something new. It's not Article 5. It's not a big change for sure. In principle, it hits our territory, but in real terms, there are some pieces of metal that falls somewhere in the delta or whatever. In the case of Poland, if you remember, 2 people have been killed in such a shot, and this doesn't come with different approaches, just enforcing, and that was why the government at Germany has decided a no flying zone in the regions of the gorges of the Danube in the border with Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about kind of the kind of collateral impacts from this conflict on Romania. What's the kind of threshold for Romania, you know, to be more decisive in its kind of actions? I guess.
What do you expect? What actions?
Well, exactly. Yeah. What actions can it take?
Declaring war to Russia for what? For a piece of no, shooting down airplanes or missiles or over the Black Sea. It's not going to happen. It's not in the framework of any country. So no, we are respecting the international law, and once again, this type of implied behavior is just an escalatory one. It comes with provocation that you don't need. And one of the red lines of NATO is no boots on the ground. Second, no escalation with Russia, no involvement of the countries in that. So you won't find a different approach until there is really a threat or a direct hit in Romania, which never happened. And there are some other developments that I'm not allowed to really expose to you, but I will just allude to a moment where Russia decided that a part of Romanians' economic exclusive zone is going to be shut down because they have some exercises with weapons and so on. We, at the diplomatic level, made them protested and said, well, this is Romania's economic exclusive zone. So overnight they changed the space and they respected the Romanian's economic exclusive zone. So as long as we are staying in the rules and as long as Russia is not directly targeting Romania or any NATO country, it will be the way that any country will react. So we cannot be involved in defending Ukraine against any type of direct threat as long as Ukraine is not an ally in NATO, we don't have a common decision in NATO, so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you for that. Robert, do you have any questions along those lines?
No, I think it's okay on my end. We can move to Q&A and then possibly if any further topics come out.
Right. I'd like to open up for questions and answers. If anyone has a question, just raise your hand or type it in the chat column, and then Dr. Chifu will hopefully answer those questions. Robert, in the meantime, do you have any kind of questions at the moment while we wait?
I have a question, if I may. So thank you, Dr. Chifu, for absolutely pointing out the most important moments and the most important aspects of this conflict. What I would like to also see your perspective on, how can the public private partnership can make a difference into this type of conflict. What I'm referring to, last year we had a general panic around the population, especially here in Romania, because yes, people are not accustomed to war, such as in...
Our news, it wasn't a panic, no. People realized and was aware that the war is happening between Russia and Ukraine. For sure, we've seen the shots happening also in Odessa and near the borders, and we've welcomed the refugees. So it was the sense that the war is happening, but panic is a little bit too much.
Thank you for this correction. So, but we had a sort of tension that we saw, and what I would like to understand is, how can we, from the private sector, support better? And I'm talking, of course, non-governmental organizations perspective, from the companies perspective. How can we train, teach, educate our people in order to understand better such a major event for them, war that comes with fake news, that comes with tensions, inclusive anxiety and psychological pressure. This is what I
think that the first and most important part is to convey to all the employees and people and support that information comes from authorized sources. That's the first thing. Yes, I know the governmental communication is not always as it should be, you have to realize, and that's another point of explanation for all the people, we are in war times, maybe not all the things can be shared with everybody. So it's another point, but actually you need to pick your information in the public sources, in the authorized sources, governmental sources, and not in the gossips, into the friend that I have in Facebook or anywhere else, and by no means into the type of propaganda that is projected and information warfare that is projected here in Romania. That is a problem. For sure, for companies, they have to prepare and develop for the opportunities that would present to them once the reconstruction of Ukraine will be in place. And that is coming with a number of things that could be done. I'm not going to advise that directly, but for everybody can understand how important it is to have the means to reconstruct Ukraine here on the ground in enough quantities with affordable prices, so on and so forth, because that will count afterwards. It will count also for Romania. Go figure out that in Romanian's economy, the European funds that are going to be invested are over 75 billion, and it will happen for the next 3 years. Go figure out how construction, for instance, here in Romania, building infrastructure, everything that is linked to those 75 billion, how it will count once you have nearby, hopefully, a country like Ukraine, which needs to be reconstructed. And the demand of those materials is going to be higher, so the prices will go up. If you have a capacity of offering, of producing those materials, it would be of huge help for itself. Also, it's a matter of interface with other companies or multinationals or with anybody who would like to come and who is going to be involved into the rebuilding Ukraine, because they are going to prefer to have those materials here nearby, very easy to transport on the other side of the border and to be used.
Thank you so much for your comment. Joe?
Yeah, I have one question, and this is related to the upcoming U.S. elections next year. You mentioned those kind of 5 scenarios at the very beginning. How influential will the outcome of the elections be in determining those 5 scenarios for next year?
Okay, we are facing a war of attrition, a long-term war. Originally in February, we have in front of us something like 3 to 5 years. But don't forget that in Syria, we are there for 12 years plus. And in the Koreas, the war is still going on for 50 years. So I'm not alluding to the fact that these could last so much, but you cannot rule out, once again, a long-term war. Now, even the fact that we have this in hand is not going to help too much. It's going to last at least till the fall of next year, and we have already this public statements to breaking and to have the strategic win of Ukraine, if it will happen. So, and we have a statement, I think that is today or yesterday, Minister of Defense Shoigu, who is already planning for the next 3 years, so 2025. So it will pass over 2024. From my point of view, what is important is 2024. If Ukraine succeeds, and I'm completely supportive, and I believe that they have a huge chance to do it. Don't forget, next year they will have the F-16, they will have the attackers, and they will have the prepared army, trained army in the West of 30,000 at least fighters. So, if this will happen, the elections in the US will be marginal. In any case, and you alluded to the fact that maybe certain president can arrive that has, as the Trumpists in the Congress, a position, an anti-Ukrainian position, or at least a reluctant position to imply money in Ukraine. You know that they are asking for kind of audit to everything that has been invested, so on and so forth. Even in the case that we will have Trump in the White House, God forbid, even in that condition, the position of the US is not going to change. And we've heard and we've seen this before. First, it's a democracy. It's a number of institutions and instruments that are pondering any type of president and his will. It's not about the will of one man. It's not an autocracy. Any president in the US has counselors. Around the presidency, there is a Congress. Around the presidency, there's a number of institutions which are autonomous, independent, even though political appointees are running those institutions. So, my bet and the credible outcome of any type of vote and of president who will be installed at the White House will not change dramatically the situations towards Ukraine. It will create nuances, it will postpone, we will have some war in the public space, maybe a lot of food for the Russian propaganda, so on and so forth, but not a dramatic change in the strategic lines and the basics related to what will happen in Ukraine.
Okay, thank you for that. Robert, do you have a final question or comment?
Actually, I wanted to ask something very similar to what Joe you have asked, and I guess looking ahead, are there any suggestions on what trends we should monitor? Are there any specific triggers that we should be worried about in terms of escalation? What basically should we look at in order to understand how could the war evolve and what impacts could they have on Romania?
So you are asking me to take another 2 hours to elaborate on this. We don't have the time. Actually, the time has exhausted. But we can have a number of triggers that could alterate, escalate. The first one would be Chinese to be directly involved into the war. The probability is quite low, but some other third parties can be involved. I alluded already to North Korea. That is a type of escalation of internationalization. We can have a different attack of Russia, a different direction. Okay, highly unlikely, but it would happen. It will change dramatically the landscape. We could have, even though once again, low probability, and I don't have the time for you to elaborate on that, Russia could use a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine. Okay, the impact is debatable, once again, highly unlikely, but it would represent an escalation. And for sure, any NATO boots on the ground will change the landscape. We could also discuss, and that's only a theoretical approach, if the West can afford to lose the war in Ukraine. So actually can afford that Ukraine loses the war. It will lead us to analyze and to realize that if the answer is no, there is a low possibility, once again, marginal possibility, that at some point we will need to have boots on the ground, so actually breaching the red line that we have already decided of. So, once again, it's about scenarios, low probability, high impact, so the definition of the black swan events. But when you are a strategic planner or you are evaluating risk, you cannot rule out those possibilities. So I had a NATO seminar happened in Bucharest last 3 days ago, with an exercise related to nuclear accidents or use of nuclear radiation, whatever in that field. I've made the assessment as well. The condition is that the probability is so low and the impact so low that normally, and the resilience of the Ukrainian people is so low that normally it won't happen. But, and that's a big but, since we have in Kremlin Putin, you cannot rule out any scenario. It's a fact of life, and I think that that can conclude our discussion.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chifu.
Thank you guys for all the great questions that you prepared for this episode. Once again, we thank you. It was an honor to have you as a guest speaker. And yes, indeed, you gave us food for thought how Americans like to frame it. We will go on and make those probability scenarios a bit wider in our perspective, going also for those that have low probability.
I think that is the most important lesson learned on the fact, well, unfortunately, I was advisor to my president, I worked with the next president, I worked with the prime minister previous to that. I was 3 times in a position of telling some of our partners, we've told you in 2008, in 2014, 2022, what we've learned is ruling out this because no, it's not probable. That they don't have the resources, they don't have the money, they don't have the capabilities. No, they won't do that. No, they are just, please read this in February 2020, 3 days previous to the attack, how some of our leaders, of the Western leaders, democratic leaders, have alluded to the possibility of Russia to launch the war. So if you look to that, the thing that we've learned the hard way is you cannot rule out any scenario.
Thank you so much. It's amazing to end like this. Thank you guys. Have a wonderful evening.